Hi, and welcome to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast presented by Wolf Precision Incorporated, where we learn about and share long range shooting and custom rifle building. I am your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. Hi, and welcome to Wolf Precision's Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Dotson, and this is episode 34. In this episode, we get a great in-depth interview with Zach Smith, co-owner of Thunder Beast Arms Corporation and the Ultra line of suppressors. So we were really excited to get Zach on the podcast, talk with him a lot. He's very knowledgeable. He is a shooter first, and I often find and always say that a lot of the people that have developed great products for our industry usually start with why they're doing it, and usually are shooters and are trying to accomplish a task or make a product better, most times even just for their own use. And it was a great story, a great interview. I learned a lot talking to him personally. So without further ado, here we go. All right, so the interview with Zach Smith of Thunder Beast Arms Corporation. I have been waiting for this interview for a long time. I am a huge fan of the suppressors. I've learned so much over suppressors over the years of how much I do not know. So, Zach, thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
To get started, though, you have an extensive background in shooting, and you've written some articles many years ago, one of which, the case for the 260. So can you talk a little bit about your shooting career, where you came from, some of the articles that you're in? Because I still have customers today that have read that article and it call up and start asking about 6.5. So where did you start shooting and what really got you hooked in it?
So I'd been shooting sort of as a sportsman, I guess, since I was a kid. And then I moved to Colorado for my old engineering career in the late 90s. And I figured out I'm not sure how I figured this out, but I figured out that Colorado had concealed carry permits. And I was like, that was the coolest thing ever. So then I think I got on Glock Talk and AR-15.com, and I started to shoot IDPA and USPSA. And then I met a group, this is around 2000, I met a group of three-gun shooters in Colorado, and those guys have been shooting three-gun at matches like the old SOF in the 90s. And they got me spooled up into three-gun. And then once you shot USPSA and IDPA and three-gun, and this was three-gun a long time ago, it was a natural progression to go into long range because, back then, most major three-gun matches had pretty far they call them a rifle shot, but a carbine shot, really, now that we speak in multi-gun language, for an AR. You're talking, 400 to 600 yards for on the clock action shooting on that. So transitioning to, what we consider long range shooting now was a pretty easy thing. And for anybody who likes rifles, the ability to hit a target at long range, especially steel, is pretty satisfying. So it was a really easy transition. And that this was the 2000 to 2004 time frame when I got into that stuff. And then, back then there weren't very many matches out there. In our sort of preferred format in Colorado was to shoot field matches. We were really into shooting like the really practical, old school, like field style three-gun matches. But there were very few matches for practical rifle shooting. And I was just marginally involved in setting up the sporting rifle match down in Raton. So there really wasn't a lot to shoot back then. So you kind of had to invent your own matches and kind of make it happen, I guess. So that's a brief. That was like the beginning of my shooting, and then as more matches cropped up, and this was before PRS, before Three Gun Nation. We shot a lot of three-gun stuff. We shot a lot of long-range stuff, such as was available. And some of it was just going out to either public or private land that we had access to, setting up targets and shooting at that point. And then that sort of morphed into, the Steel Safari, which was run at the Blue Steel Ranch. And that was the prior owner of that ranch, Dave Wheeler. He ran that. I think his first year was 98. And the first year that I shot it was 06. And then that was honestly a lot of work for one guy to set up. So he kind of was going to give it up, and me and a couple of guys sort of like took it over from him. So we ran the match on his property from '08 onward. And then John at JP Enterprises bought the ranch probably 3 or 4 years ago now. We've still been running that ever since. So this year was like the 10th or 11th year that we've ran that match down there. So anyway, I sort of, shot a whole bunch of multi-gun, pistol, and 3-gun and long-range stuff. And then I guess we sort of transitioned into running a whole bunch of events in this region. I think the busiest year we had, I think we ran like 7 matches in 1 year. And these are all like major level matches. Things from conventional 3-gun matches. We ran a match it was a couple years ago, 3 years ago, called Resurgence. And the idea was to sort of like reprise the old spirit of SOF 3-gun. So we had all technically hard but not gimmicky stages just set out in the field, and that was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the old timers who'd shot the old stuff really liked it. And a lot of the new people who'd never had that experience liked it as well. We've got just a variety of matches that go on in this region. I think we're pretty lucky that the Rocky Mountain region is pretty chock full of pretty good matches. And now, of course, PRS has exploded over the last, 5 years. So now it's really a great time for both long-range shooters in terms of matches that you can go to, and the equipment available now is just it has sort of jaw-dropping quality compared to what you were in for. If we're talking like 2005, in 2005, what you did is there were like maybe 1 or 2 somewhat well-known builders, but that was probably about it. And, other than that, you basically bought a Remington and had, somebody who'd done it before help you put a new barrel on and stuff and get it going. And I remember back then, there weren't, now AIs are everywhere, but back then, I only personally knew of, I think, 2 people who had an AI rifle, and that was my first bolt action, or a serious bolt action, was an AI AW, which was kind of, back then, man, $4,300 for a bolt action rifle was pretty crazy. Like really crazy. But my logic at the time was, hey, I've already shot 3-gun for several years, and I know, I need to start practicing and get into this, but I don't want to waste a year basically, buying a Remington and then trying to fix all of its problems for however long that takes. Put a new barrel on, and then who knows what problems you might have. And then you have to do load experiments to find a load that works with whatever you've got. And buying the AI was just like an off-the-shelf solution, which is kind of a big hammer to apply to the problem. But you look at what people do now, and it's basically the same thing. People are going to drop quite a bit of money on, an off-the-shelf, be it, like a custom, a semi-custom / production, or one of these like factory high-end rifles. And there's just so many awesome options now. It's just like pick your price point, and from anything from about $1,000 up to like $8,000. There's great rifles all through there.
Yeah, and back in the day, like, well, it makes you sound old when you say stuff like that, but back in the early 2000s, late 90s, if you could find a tactical match, they were sort of hard to come by. You sort of had to know people that were shooting already. Right now, we're so blessed that, like, if you're into long-range shooting, there are matches coming up everywhere. And the equipment, like you said, is just through the roof. If you can imagine it, somebody's making it, inventing it, changing it, or making it better. Yeah,
absolutely. You mentioned having to know somebody. You literally had to know somebody to get into these matches. There was no way to get the information. Like, there's no way you could show up and shoot a match because there was no public information out there on what you would even need to show up to do, or like what you would have to do there.
Mm-hmm.
So, you almost needed to have a friend like who'd already shot it. And actually down in Blue Steel, I think everybody who showed up there definitely knew someone who'd already been there. So it was word of mouth.
Yeah.
And in terms of like publicly, for a while there, we tried to go out and travel around the country and shoot other matches. And I remember we went to Utah and shot the Sniper's Paradise match. We went to Texas and shot TAC Pro. And just like the regional differences were pretty stark in terms of like, if you go to a quote unquote sniper match and expect to shoot stuff, at one match, they're having you shoot like, pictures of little flies at 100 yards, in like a minute with like a 300 Win Mag. And in another match, you're actually, you might, like at the Steel Safari back then, I mean, it was the same format it is now. You're walking out in the high desert or whatever, and all of a sudden you come up to a shoot position. There's an RO that's there that says, "Hey, guess what? You have 5 minutes to shoot the stage. Go!" And you're like, you don't know where anything is. You have to find all your targets in the field and all this sort of stuff. And it's really a different set of problems. And I think whenever you have a promulgation of an idea across the nation or whatever, be it Three Gun Nation or be it PRS or NRL or whatever, it's good that there is a spreading of ideas. I think there's good and bad sides to both of that, and that's why I've always, been more interested, I guess, in what we call the outlaw matches. That sort of, because back in 2000 to 2006, every big three-gun match that had been around had its own flavor. Like Rocky Mountain had its own flavor, Superstition Mountain had its own flavor. There were some out east that I never got to, like Kyle Lamb had this really hard match that I never was able to get to before he quit doing it. And they all had their own flavor, and I think that's good.
What do you think about, and what got you writing that article? Because I bring this up because I read the article, and I thought it was nice that people were actually talking about it. But is the case for the 260, is that article still up? Do you still have a website that still has that article posted?
Yeah. So just a little story, like the whole reason I started to write, and the first article I wrote that got posted anywhere was it was that intro to long range shooting scopes, because like the way it had, and this was probably like 06, 07. I had done quite a bit of research into what scopes sort of optimized the problem solving of what you had to do while you were on the clock. And I kept talking to people and having the same conversation like 5 times. And I realized, hey, I've had the same conversation 5 times, so I just write this down. So I wrote it down and it became that article. And then that article kind of got expanded into a 3-part thing on here are the nuts and bolts of what you need to get into long range shooting, like what I called practical long range shooting. So I kind of laid out the qualitative evaluation of here are features that you can get in the scope. Here are some things to consider. Here are the features that you really want for a long range shooting scope, as compared to Leopold hunting scope or whatever, or even a Leopold, M1. I mean, that was, the M1 knobs were the old entry level thing. And that really isn't that. I mean, now everything has, you have your Schmitten binder that has 2 turns with little yellow windows that pop up in the second turn, and you have 11 mils per turn. So it's there are so many things that we just take for granted now. I mean, back then it was it was revolutionary to have mil clicks, in a mil reticle. Everyone's like, "What is this wizardry?" And I'm like, "Well, it wasn't my idea. It's just
right.
Once you look at it a certain way, you're like, oh yeah, we should definitely be doing this the same way,
Yeah, you have matching reticle and matching knobs was an ingenious invention that should have happened a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, there's some of these things, and another example of old stuff that is still good is the AI bipod. The AI bipod, everyone hated because in the U.S. we think like a Harris bipod, but really. The AI bipod, if you actually use it in the field the way it was probably intended to be used, it's a fantastic bipod. It's just that we've been in, there's and even today, this is over a decade later, people still think they want a Harris with the pod lock. And I'm not trying to downplay that bipod, because for what it is, it's halfway okay. But it's just if you look at it objectively, having spring-loaded legs, it makes you right. And all these people that have to, if you start off with a bipod that has spring-loaded legs, then you're going to get hop. And the way that you do that is you have to preload the bipod quite a bit, right? So now you added a layer onto your shooting technique that's really just there to solve a problem, because everyone shoots a cheap bipod, you know? And, on a 3-gun rifle, if you're going to be shooting it fast, whatever, a Harris is fine. It's not that heavy, whatever. But you can get a better bipod, and people are starting to realize that now. But anyway, going back to 260, that I started to write some articles basically to sort of explain some stuff that I felt like I had been answering, or talking to people quite a bit about the same topic over and over again. And I, being an engineer, it's I don't want to solve the problem 80 times. I want to solve it once and then just run the program again or whatever.
Right.
So that was kind of my effort to just get some information out there. And over a few year period, I probably wrote, 40 articles, and some of them got published for real. But that was kind of it was an interesting thing to do, like in my phase of my my gun career, I guess. They're all still up on the Demigod site, on the demigodllc.com. That's an old. It looks old now, but all the data's still up there. All the articles are still up there. So it's a lot of good stuff. From if you want to look into a window of what stuff was happening 15 to 10 years ago.
Oh, and I still think it's great. So the website for them to go back and see some of these articles, because I still think the stuff that you talk about was awesome. For a news shooter, it'd be great. What was the website you still have it under?
Yeah, it's demigodllc.com. So if you just go there, it's got all the links to all the old articles on there. And really, like, so, some of them, the information is still good. Like, I wrote that article, like the one on optics. I mean, yeah, there's more optics out there now, but like, are there fundamentally like new features and scopes? I mean, not really. You might have like a 3 to 20 instead of a 3 to 12, you know,
Right.
Or you might have like the way the knobs lock might be a little bit different. But I mean, really all the fundamental like qualities of the scope, and by that I mean like the features, they're all, you know, it's the same set of stuff. It's just there's more scopes now. In that article I wrote, I did a shootout article on 6.5 Creed versus 6.5 by 47 versus 260. And I mean, that article still holds up pretty well. The only exception is that there are more bullets out now, and there's more different brass available for the different calibers. You know, those questions got answered a little bit different now. But I mean, the case capacity hasn't changed in 10 years, so it's pretty much the same answers.
And what caliber are you shooting today? Are you still shooting a 6.5?
I still have barrels. Well, now with Thunder Beast, I shoot so much demo stuff that I shoot a lot more standard calibers, but I still have 6.5 Creed and 260 barrels that I shoot. So
now let's talk about the Thunder Beast arms. What got you started in even thinking about building suppressors?
Yeah, so you know, this was back in 2005. The first time I ever shot a suppressor was a mutual friend of me and some of my shooting buddies. He had an AW, or it was an AW or an AE, I can't remember, in 308 with a jet. It was Mike's Gun Sales in Texas, a jet suppressor, and I got to shoot that a couple of times at Whittington Center for Rocky Mountain 3-gun. And I thought that was just about the coolest rifle I'd ever shot at the time. But the jet suppressors were about the only one that people knew of at that time that didn't actively harm the accuracy of like a sub-minute rifle, right?
Right.
So me and, you know, some of the other owners of Thunder Beast, we actually owned jets back then. But then what happened is, I don't know what happened with them, but I know some friends of mine were having trouble. They had cans on order and had a hard time getting cans out of jet. And I had met Ray Sanchez and Shane Coppinger, are both the other two owners of Thunder Beast, and we'd all met shooting like the Raton match, the sporting rifle match down in Raton, and some other matches. And we kind of had a discussion once, and we're like, "Hey, should we, you know, make some cans?" And we didn't really start it as to be a business. Obviously it was a business, but we didn't start it for that purpose. We started it because there was really the one source we knew of for cans that wouldn't harm accuracy had kind of evaporated, it seemed like, or no one could get cans from them anymore. And Shane had been a machinist in the Navy, so he had the machining experience and a couple small CNC machines at the time. So in 2007, we made the decision to start up the company, and I think our FFL SOP came through in early 2008. And we cranked out the original 30P, you know, I think in February of that year. And our original design goal was to just make something that was, you know, based on suppression level, weight, and accuracy. It couldn't be worse than the jet, and it had to exceed it in at least one of the categories. And I don't remember which one. I think it was lighter than the jet. It was about the same loudness, I think, at the time. But that was our original design goal, was really just to make one that, you know, so we had a source of suppressors that we could shoot for additional bolt guns. And then, you know, obviously having a competition background, and Shane was a high power and bullseye shooter in the Navy, and he's won a lot of stuff. That was his background. Ray was a pro athlete in mountain biking in the 90s, and then did a whole bunch of startup stuff. He's sort of like a natural athlete, so he's good at doing whatever he applies himself to. And I, being an engineer, I kind of geeked out on the whole shooting thing and dedicated a lot of my time to it for, I don't know, a decade or a year or whatever, years or whatever. So we all came to it from a competition background and wanting to have accurate rifles.
And you brought up a really good point because this has been a problem. So, I love shooting suppress. I mean, once you get a suppressor, it's hard to go back, and there's so many benefits to it if it's done right. And we tell customers that either purchase or build or whatever that the rifle should always shoot better with the suppressor on than off. If your groups open up and it starts shooting all over the place, there's a problem with suppressors. And what we noticed over the last even 10 years is a company will come on the market producing a good product, and then as they scale, the quality goes away, and then we're having customers with baffle strikes and just all kinds of bad stuff. So you picked up a really good point, is creating a great quality suppressor for a precision bolt action rifle. That's got to be a totally different concept, design, working on your end to try to produce it. So going after that, how hard was it, and what kind of standards did you set? Because we see it. There's still a ton of suppressors that are on the market today that there was no way I would buy one. Not mentioning any names, but we've had them here. And I'm a shooter, and you can tell right away when you put it on, or you get two of them that are two serial numbers apart and are getting baffle strikes. With a 6.5 and a 30 cal can. So explain what you guys went through and why you went after, because I think that's a market that really wasn't well taken care of back then.
Well, in some sense, it's not really. You mentioned a variety of factors there, but if we just look at making one suppressor, because once you scale it up to production, the whole thing changes. But with one suppressor, if you want it to be accurate, you need a design like the theoretical design that doesn't sort of in theory or in practice actually just harm the accuracy of the rifle.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be things like a really asymmetrical baffle design has a good probability of screwing up accuracy. But the other thing is just building it right. And you look at, I guess there's ways that you can do it that are due to the manufacturing procedure and ways that are just sort of sloppiness in manufacturing. Mm-hmm. I think those are a little bit different factors. So, in our first can, the baffle stack was fully symmetrical, so there was no asymmetrical flow or force on the bullet as it passed through, which eliminates, if you make it symmetrical, then sort of by definition, there can't really be an asymmetrical force. So that's one way to do it. And then we just made sure to keep the can straight as we built it. And I guess building it right is one of the actual procedures you go through to put the thing together. And the way you do it makes a big difference. We keep our cans pretty much on center the whole way through the manufacturing process. Mm-hmm. And we go through a lot of pains to keep the thing straight. Our run out specs are pretty tight, and we keep the whole can, centered around the body of the can, centered around the bore of the can throughout the whole manufacturing process. And there's other things that you have to do as well. And some of them are just basic machining. And I'm not a machinist. I handle the business and tech side, the company, and obviously some of the shooting stuff. Our machinist could go through all that stuff. But if you cut the back shoulder of the thing wrong. But there's also choices that you can make in how you manufacture it and how it's put together. It's not uncommon. You can go out and find on the market fairly easily cans that have pretty obviously been put together a certain way that's a lot cheaper. For example, what you can do is you can put a stack and a tube together, with the rear end threaded, and then basically you EDM through concentric to the rear, threads basically, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the thing if you do it that way is if you go and roll those cans on your desk, there's a pretty good probability that the exit hole won't be in the center of the exit end of the can. And that's because they haven't really taken an effort to align the rear mount, so to speak, to the suppressor body. And that's just sloppy, but it is a much cheaper way to make a can, or you look at monolithic cans where you have a monocore. And by monocore, I mean, take a piece of bar stock. It's more complicated than this, but basically drill a bunch of holes through it. So in other words, the thing is, it's not axially symmetric. It's a solid piece of metal that you basically drilled holes through from one side, and you'd use a mill or whatever, and then you basically slip that inside of a tube and fix the end somehow.
Mm-hmm.
That's a monocore can. Well, the advantage of a monocore can is they're super cheap to make because you don't have all these baffles that have to be intricately cut and then welded together or put together some other way. You basically just throw your piece of bar stock in like a mill and just set the thing going. But the downside to that is suppression, because you can't get, like, if you stack paper cups, you have like material that kind of like overlaps, right? Because each piece overlaps the next piece.
Mm-hmm.
But in a monocore can, you can never have that because it all comes from one solid piece. If you approach the problem from, we need to make a can that's accurate, it just rules out a lot of other ways you could design it or ways you could manufacture it cheaper. And that's why our cans end up a little bit, more expensive on the higher end of the spectrum than other cans, because if we're going to make them right, it takes, and make them quiet and make them lightweight, it takes a fairly involved manufacturing process to do that.
Oh, yeah. And, I find it in almost every part of the industry, whether it's building custom rifles or making great triggers or barrels, usually you find the people that were involved in the great ones that sort of rise to the top were usually shooters first and accuracy focused. So like I think one of the reasons why your cans are so good is because of your background, and you know that what you're doing matters and that everything can have a negative effect. I mean, that's a really big deal. I always find that the best people in the industry making stuff are usually shooters first.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have passion for it. And, the gun industry, having seen it, as a consumer, as a competitor, as a writer, and then as someone in it, and then I used to, I also used to work in high tech. So I've seen like big businesses like HP or IBM. I've worked in companies like those as well. There's definitely a level of passion that people bring to the gun industry that really gives it a lot of fire. And I think it's exactly for the reason that you mentioned. And similarly, there's a downside is which you have these hobby guys who, you're in the industry because you love it, but like your business will flame out. And, there's the stereotype of the gun shop that, sends away customers, or, even in the last couple of years, we've seen some silencer companies basically flame out because they had an idea that was, it may have been a good idea, but when they went to actually like run a business on it or actually manufacture like a bunch of them, they just ran into a huge amount of problems.
Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely some pitfalls, and, going back to quality or what have you, being able to scale your business up by a factor of 100 or whatever, and still maintain, each, can, let's say, has the same quality that your first one did. That's a challenge, and that's, one reason why we have right now I think our backlog is like 7 or 8 months. And the reason is just because, right now we're cranking out almost more cans than we ever have. I think there was a peak in 2016, right before the 41F crash, where we had our instantaneous rate may have been higher, but we're cranking out a gigantic number of cans, and they're all pretty much identical, but like, we make all of our stuff in-house. The only thing that we send out is stuff like ion bond or anodizing, like coatings that we don't want to do in-house for whatever reason. And that allows us to keep the quality and keep really hands-on in monitoring what's going on and have the quality of the product be up. But it also means that we can't, scale up super quick by like a factor of 10 or whatever to, keep our wait times short, which is frustrating to everybody, but I don't know. The upside of not being beholden to anybody is you can do the right thing, and just, if the heat that you get is that people are a little bit upset that if they order a new one from you, they have to wait a little while, I guess that's okay. But, we have a really strong network of distributors and dealers, and all those cans that we ship out every day are going to those dealers. So, buy one from a dealer. That's the best way to do it.
Yeah. And then some questions on the suppressors themselves that I think would be interesting to talk about, and that are important to us with bolt action rifles, I guess. Quick detach direct thread. When I was shooting, I almost completely avoided quick detach forever because they were just prone to have the most problems. There's still companies today that have a massive problem with that. It seems like you guys have a really nice system and thought about it with the bolt action rifle. Although, we still try to bring ours in direct thread, but just your thoughts on quick detach, direct thread, and maybe some challenges that you faced, because we are talking about trying to make precision bolt action rifles and suppressors to shoot to that quality. So what's your thoughts on that, and what did you run into challenge-wise with that?
Sure. So, QD mounts, I think, rightly had a bad reputation for a long time, and I think to a large extent they still do. Because if you take your stereotypical QD mount, it's going to have like an Acme thread on the outside of a muzzle device. And in an Acme thread, there's one of these really, really coarse threads where you might only have like maybe 2 turns to get the thing on all the way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to mention names, but like if you just look at common like M4 cans, a lot of them have this. And then they might have like a little ratchet, to keep the thing on there, right?
Mm-hmm.
The downside of all those ratchet style mounts is basically that when you tighten the thing down, if like where the can is like fully tight is not quite to the next notch, but a little bit past the prior notch, it's going to back off a tiny bit, and it's going to be a tiny bit loose. And any vibration you have in a can versus the barrel is going to harm your accuracy. So, one way that people have tried to address that is they just add more teeth, right? So they make the teeth smaller and have more of them. That doesn't really get rid of the problem. It just makes it a little bit less. And there are other QD mounts out there, and some of them work kind of pretty good, and some of them still don't work that well. For a long time, direct thread was the only way to go for precision rifles. And then we offer direct thread. Now, the downside of direct thread is, so in direct thread, you have basically about 5/8 of an inch of threads, usually in 5/8, 24 threads. And then you have a flat shoulder. You have the back of the can basically abuts up to a flat shoulder that's right behind the threads on the muzzle. And you just tighten it down, and hopefully it stays tight, right? Mm-hmm. So in practice, what happens is, if those muzzle threads aren't cut just right, the suppressor may not stay tight. So if the guy who cuts your threads for your rifle cuts them a little bit too small, and then maybe not too small, just a little bit small, then it's going to get loose easier. It's right. Not that the threads hold it. The threads don't hold it straight. What holds it straight is the pressure between the rear of the can and the shoulder behind the threads is what keeps the thing straight. Mm-hmm. So you have a right angle versus a right angle. But if, just as a matter of course, if you have vibration and your threads are looser, like a looser fit, it is going to get loose easier.
Yeah.
Now, the other side is, and we used to have a lot of problem with this on our old cans when we had titanium threads inside the can, is that there are thread specifications, and what almost all cans use is called Class 3 threads, which is confusing because we're also talking about NFA or Class 3 stuff. But Class 3 is like a machinery or like a machinist classification for thread fit, where like most nuts and bolts are Class 2, and Class 3 is the next more precise thread fit, and anything beyond Class 3 is an interference fit, which basically means you're not going to get it off ever. It's an interference fit. Mm-hmm. So what would happen was if someone cut, and up until, and even today still, but, it's really not that uncommon for like your local gunsmith who doesn't do a lot of super precision stuff. If he's going to thread a muzzle for like a muzzle device, he might have like an old A2 flash hider on his lathe, and he'll just like, if it screws on, he calls it good, right?
Right.
Well, that's not to any measurement. And then if you have threads on the muzzle that are a little bit too big, either the can won't go on or like it won't come off.
Right, it'll go on and stick.
And it'll get stuck on there.
Yeah.
Right. So, what we did to fix that in the Ultra series is we actually used an ion bonded 17-4 stainless insert into the back of the cans for direct thread cans. And the advantage of using such a hard material with that coating is basically either it'll go on or it won't go on. There's no like halfway. So that's good. But to answer your question, we also have what we call a BA or a CB mount. And those are a brake that you sort of like Loctite to your muzzle, which sort of avoids all the problems with the threads being loose. And then it's a brake or a flash hider, and behind the flash hider tines or the brake ports, you have external threads. And this general type is called a thread over muzzle brake because your can threads over your muzzle brake. Mm. And you have threads on the outside of the brake. And typically what most people do now is they have a tapered shoulder behind the threads or in front of the threads. And when you have two tapered things that made up, the fit is a lot tighter than just like a flat shoulder on like a regular direct thread can. So as a result of having, so if you have bigger threads on the outside of the brake, you have more thread surface area, which is more holding power and more friction. And then if you have these two tapered surfaces that made up when you cinch the thing down, the friction between there is pretty extreme and it locks up tighter. So that's what we recommend for our product line for almost all uses.
And then you still offer the direct thread, is that correct? Because we have some here that we're using for our shooting school we got in that are all direct thread that you guys did for us. And that's something that you're still going to offer?
Yeah, we still offer, the regular Ultra Series we still offer in direct thread or CB mount. And then we still offer the 338 Ultra suppressor that comes with its thread over muzzle brake version that's bigger, that's called the 338 BA brake, which just stands for brake attach. And then we have the third mount. So we have direct thread, we have the CB for the smaller frame cans, the BA for the bigger frame cans. And then we have the SR, which is the secure retention. And right now, the only product that's on is the 338 version of that mount. But we are working on some stuff to shoot that mount on like 30 caliber or 5.56 rifles as well.
I guess a common question people are going to ask is, how often do you clean your suppressor and what do you clean it with? I mean, you go online and you read all of this stuff about how often and what they're using, some of the chemicals that they're mixing up. What do you recommend for guys?
Sure. So back when we started the company, we thought that centerfire cans were self-cleaning. And I mean, that is, in some situations, that is true, but only to a point. I think there was a time at which people started to shoot, they just happened to be shooting. I think it was when people got more into like the little bit overbore from 308 cartridges that shot powders more like H1000 and something like that, that this started to be more of an issue. If you shoot, I'd say, what I consider like a moderate amount of long range with a powder that doesn't happen to foul very much, you may almost literally never have to clean the inside of your can. You know, it might add an ounce or two over time, but it might level off and just like not get a lot heavier. But that said, if you just change powder, like H1000 is one of the most fouling powders we've ever come across. So if I was shooting 4350 and I switched to H1000, you know, all of a sudden my can might start to gain weight and like not stop gaining weight, you know. So what we recommend is just weigh your can when it's new or figure out what the manufacturer spec is. And if it weighs, 2 ounces is a pretty good limit. If it gets about 2 ounces heavier, I'd say it's time to clean it. Because what we found is that if you can keep the amount of accumulated carbon under, I'd just say a few ounces, it's fairly easy to clean out. The more you have, obviously, the longer it'll take. But if you get up to have like a half a pound of carbon in there, it's going to take a long, long time to get out. And you may never get out like the base layer, so to speak, that would have been easier like if you had cleaned it a long time ago. So what we found, and we've tried every rumor of a cleaning scheme on the internet we've tried, but what we ended up with is calcium lime rust cleaner, CLR, will dissolve carbon pretty well. So what we do is we'll basically plug up the can and fill it with CLR and let it soak like for a day, and then we'll rinse it out and reweigh it and just keep doing that until it's cleaned out. And if you do that on a regular basis, it shouldn't, you should be able to get it almost all out of there. Now, a couple of things is whenever you deal with, any cleaning stuff from guns, you want to be careful of lead. So, what you produce in the solution might be toxic in some way, so be careful of that. And CLR will attack steel. So for titanium cans, it's totally good. That's what we use. But if you have like a direct thread insert, you don't want to get it on the direct thread insert too much because that's steel. So I just keep it away from steel. But for titanium cans, that CLR works real good. You can use an ultrasonic, but we found that just soaking it in CLR actually works better.
And then the CLR that you're talking about, like with our cans here, they're direct thread. You're saying be careful not to get that on the direct thread insert?
Yeah, well, just don't, if you get a little bit on there, it's okay. Just don't soak it in it. So with those, what I do is I put the can with the muzzle side down, like the exit side down, and just fill it up so it's just below the level of that first flange in the direct thread insert,
Mm-hmm. And then just let it soak.
Yep, and then just rinse it out afterwards. And you might, you have to let it dry to weigh it again, because obviously there'll still be water and stuff in there. But if you do that for a few days, you should be able to get it out of there. If somebody, I think so we offer a service, because some people just don't want to deal with it. So if you send in your can, one of our cans obviously to us, we'll clean it for you once a year for free if you cover shipping. So that's a real easy way to do it. And, one like preventative story would be, we had a guy send one in, and I think it had over 12 ounces, so 2/3 of a pound or 3/4 of a pound
Oh my
of
gosh.
carbon in there. It weighed a lot. It was an Ultra, I think it was an Ultra 9, maybe 7, but it weighed like close to 20 ounces, I think. So at that point, that's going to take us, I don't know, probably 100 cleaning cycles to get all of it out of there, just because we know how long it takes to get the stuff out. So that's why we recommend to really clean it when you just have like a few ounces in there, because it's going to be way easier.
Oh, that is really awesome. And before we let you go, did you have anything that you want to add? Anything new you guys are working on or coming out with? Just a little teaser to keep an eye out for?
I'll just give I think the last 2 products we came out with was the 338 Ultra SR, which AI is selling on their ASR packages. It's pretty cool. So they have a package where they're selling like three barrels in a rifle, and then you can get our can to match it. And that's like our full mil spec, 338 suppressor. And for future work, people always ask, are you going to get rid of the Ultras or whatever? And the answer is no. The Ultras are such a solid product. But we are working on some cans that would have the SR mount on the back, and they'll be bigger in diameter than the regular Ultra cans. So they won't just like replace them. There'll be a different form factor, and we're going to sell both at the same time. So that's that. I don't have an ETA for that. When I do, I'll post something up. But and then we did come out with a Bipod at SHOT Show this year. So those have been shipping for about 3 or 4 months. And that was sort of like the can. We made a can a long time ago to sort of be what we wanted a can to be at the time. And this Bipod was sort of like me, Ray, and Shane, and our engineer Curtis's. We took all of our Bipod experience over the last couple of decades and rolled it into our Bipod, and it's pretty good. So take a look at our Bipod, and if you want a precision can, you're going to be hard pressed to find it better than the Ultra right now. So.
Yeah, I will absolutely agree. We got ours here for our shooting school because next year we're going to be all suppressed, and we've got a chance to run them for the last couple of weeks on many different rifles, actually, and the weight's amazing on the Ultra 9. It's just so light. Sound suppression is awesome. Repeatability, accuracy is everything that they were supposed to be. So I can't tell you how grateful we are to have them here at the school, and really just a great product. So, Zach, I promised you that I wouldn't steal you for more than 20 or 25 minutes away from work, and I probably went over that a little bit, but I super appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast and talk about suppressors, especially, with all the really cool stuff that you guys are working on. So thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, thank you, Zach, for taking the time for coming on the podcast. That was a lot of great information. And just as a shooter, it gives you an idea about, over a decade developing and research and working hard and really just trying to come up with a great product for us, the shooters. I think that is awesome. So, Zach, I want to especially say thank you for taking the time out of your day to come on the podcast and share and talk a lot about both your product and your experiences when it gets involved with the suppressors. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to send us an email here at contact@Wolf Precision. If you have any questions for Zach, of course, you can contact those guys at Thunderbeast Arms Corporation. I can personally say that we have 6 of their suppressors here, soon to be 10, for our long-range shooting school, and we have found that the accuracy is stellar, the suppression is awesome, they are super light. I am so grateful and glad that we decided to use them as suppressors for our own in-house use, and they were selected long before we asked Zach to come on the podcast and talk about his product. The backlog that they have, with so many people wanting their suppressors, is probably a great sign that they're doing a great job in building a quality product. That is important to us as shooters. So thank you for taking the time for joining us here at the podcast. I really do appreciate it. Any feedback, of course, you can shoot us an email at contact@wolfprecision.net. We always like to say, hey, if you want to see what's new and exciting, what we're working on here, as well as what will be coming up in our long-range shooting schools, we will have our 2020 dates posted within the next week or so. So stop by and check out what we've got going on at wolfprecision.net. That's our home website. So thank you for taking all the time for joining us. My name is Jamie Dotson. I'm your host, and you are listening to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building Podcast.